To all my fishermen, let me ask you a question. If you were to throw your line into the water 20 different times, how many of those times would result in a hooked fish? How many of those times would result in a fish that you catch? Is it 20? If it's 20, we need to talk, because that's a lot. You're batting 1,000. It's pretty good. I need to know what you're doing so that I can replicate it and do the same thing. But is it 20? Is it 10? 10's a lot. 10 out of 20 times you cast a line, you catch a fish. That's a lot. You're doing really good. 5? If we're being realistic, it's probably out of 20 casts, you're probably hooking to a fish maybe once, maybe twice. And the conclusion that you arrive to is that most of a fisherman's time is spent not even catching fish. I mean, think about it. Think of all that a fisherman does in order to catch that one fish. Think about all the time he spends preparing to even go to the river. Time spent tying flies, getting your rod ready, getting your reel ready, your line. Time spent researching fish behavior, fish patterns, how fish behave in certain weather, certain temperatures. Speaking of, researching the weather, researching the conditions for the day and all that stuff. There's so much that goes into even just preparing to go fishing. And then you go fishing, and before you really cast a line, if you're smart, if you're a good fisherman, you'll kind of just stop and look and observe things before you actually cast. Where are the fish at? Are they on top water? Are they biting the bugs at the top on the surface of the water? Or are they down below biting bugs down below? Are they at this spot that has cover over here that's kind of hidden by a tree? Or maybe they're behind this rock here. So you got to figure out where the fish are. And then once you start figuring that out, then you can start casting. And again, let's say out of 20 casts, you only catch one fish. That's still pretty good. Most of a fisherman's time is spent not even catching fish. So the question is, why do you do it? Like, why do fishermen do it? Because it's exhilarating. It's fun and it's a challenge. That's the beauty of it. The beauty of it is the challenge. The beauty of it is the fact that it's difficult. And the fact that it's difficult means that if you want to be a successful fisherman, you have to persevere. You have to be able to persevere through the difficult days, the days where it's raining, the days where you don't catch a single fish all day. I had a buddy of mine recently who was talking about fishing, and he said, man, I really got into fishing for a while. It's like 6 months, but then I had a few days where I went fishing all day and didn't catch a single thing, and I just quit. And it's like, fair enough, no disrespect, but that happens. That's the story of a lot of people. A lot of people don't like fishing because there are days where you don't catch anything. If you want to be a good fisherman, you have to be persistent. And the same is true with our faith. The same exact thing is true with our faith. I'm a youth minister, and every now and then I'll have a student who comes up and he's like, hey, I want to read the Bible more. I want to get more into the Bible. What do I do? It's like, just pick it up and read. It's not magic. Just pick it up and read. Well, where do I start? Okay, fair question. Good point. There's a few good places to start, but if you really want to be persistent with the Bible, if you really want to be knowledgeable about the Bible, if you really want to know your stuff when it comes to Scripture, you just have to read. You just have to put in the time. Can't tell you how many times I've talked to people who are like, man, I had this Bible reading plan, and I was going to read the whole Bible in a year, and I started, and then I got to Leviticus, and I couldn't do it, man. It was miserable, and it's like, okay, you wonder why you're not good at reading the Bible. You wonder why you're not further along in your Bible knowledge. It's because you're not persistent. That's the case for a lot of people. That's no disrespect. I struggle with that too. Sometimes you just got to power through, but you got to be persistent. Same with prayer life. Let's say you want a good prayer life, and it's like, man, what do I do? Well, you have to pray every day. You have to put in the time. You have to put in the hours. You have to punch in the clock, not for the sake of punching in the clock, but because the benefit of praying is so great. But you actually have to do it. And let's say you're persistent with your prayer for, let's say, a whole year. A year down the road, you look back and you're like, I have a pretty killer prayer life now. It's because I've been persistent this entire time. The same is true with church. With church, a lot of people want to reap what they haven't sown yet. And what I mean by that is a lot of people want the benefits of a church family of excuse me, I have allergies. It's been a battle. Regardless, a lot of people want the the benefits of a church family, people who you can call on in a time of need, people who you can call and say, "Hey, look, you're a Christian. I'm struggling with this. I don't know what to do. How can I? What do I do?" And people want the benefits of a church family who will love their wife and love their children and love them as a family, but they don't ever put in the time of being the church. Whether it's good or not, with church, very often, if you want to get those benefits, you have to be that to other people first. You have to be there for other people in their time of need too. And you have to be able to help people through the difficulties that they're going through. And you have to love the families that you see around you and the people that you see around you. It doesn't just happen naturally, necessarily. We're all human. We're all flawed. But if you want to someday wake up and look back and say, wait a second, I'm surrounded by people who love me, who I can call in a time of need, who I can call and say, hey, you're a Christian and I'm struggling with this, help. If you want to be surrounded by that, sometimes you have to be the church first. Fishing requires perseverance. Faith also requires perseverance. Today, we're going to look at the story of Joseph and the story of Jesus. And at first glance, that's an Old Testament character, and that's Jesus from like the New Testament, the Gospels, and all that stuff. So they're so random characters. Like, what do they have to do with each other? And you're going to see by the end of the sermon that their lives almost mirror each other. Joseph's life is a microcosm of Jesus' story, and it's a beautiful thing. So the text for today is actually like Genesis 37 through like 50. It's a long piece of text. And we're not going to read the entire thing because that would take forever. So I'm going to kind of walk you through the life of Joseph. And then we're going to see how his life mirrors Jesus's, or how his life is a microcosm of Jesus's life. To start in chapter 37 of Genesis, Joseph is one of 12 brothers. One of 12 brothers, and these 12 brothers actually go on to eventually be the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob is their father, but you have Joseph. He's one of 12 brothers. Joseph is actually the favorite brother. We always say that playing favorites with your kids or with anybody really is just not a good thing. It's just something you probably shouldn't do, and that's true here too. Joseph was Jacob's favorite son, and Jacob he didn't necessarily hide it. Matter of fact, one day he gave his son a coat of many colors. It's like this coat of honor. It's like this thing of status, right? This coat that meant that you're somebody. It was very obvious that Joseph was Jacob's favorite, and this made Joseph's brothers irate. They couldn't stand him. Matter of fact, it said when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not bring themselves to speak peaceably to him. So it wasn't just like, oh man, it's kind of a weird situation where like my dad likes him more. It's kind of weird. It's hatred. I can't even bring myself to speak peaceably to you. They hated their brother Joseph, and so they plotted against him. They came up with this plan to get rid of their brother. There were these pits, these massive pits, and a lot of them didn't have water. They ended up making this plan to throw Joseph into one of these pits. And so they did. Joseph went out to the field or to this area of the wilderness where his brothers were working and doing whatever. And they actually took their brother and threw him into this pit. And after they throw him into this pit, they see these, I believe they were Midianite. I believe there are Midianites who are traveling, and they say, "Wait a second, we can sell our brother to these Midianites. We can make money off of our brother." And so they take him from this pit. They sell him. They take the robe, the coat of many colors. They take this coat, dip it in animal's blood, and bring it back to your father. And they're like, "Your son died. He's just dead." And Jacob was absolutely distraught. He just lost his son. As far as he knew, he just lost his son. Isn't that wild? His brothers threw him in a pit and then sold him into slavery, telling their father that he died. And so then Joseph winds up as a slave of Potiphar. Now, Potiphar was one of Pharaoh's officers. He was an officer of Pharaoh. And so Joseph was a slave to Potiphar. Now, what's crazy is that the Lord was with Joseph the entire time. All throughout Joseph's life, all the trials that you're going to hear about through Joseph's life, God was with him the entire time. But Joseph was a slave of Potiphar. And while he was a slave, he was very successful. Everything he did, it went really well. And so Potiphar noticed that and raised Joseph to Potiphar's right hand. Basically, he's the right-hand man of Potiphar, who is one of Pharaoh's officers. So it's a position of power. He didn't have to worry about anything. He was in charge of everything, but he's one of the slaves. And so he's in this position of power. He's at Potiphar's right hand. And then Potiphar's wife eventually decides that she wants to sleep with Joseph. If you don't think the Bible's interesting, if you think the Bible's boring, go read it. It's all kinds of drama. It's like a soap opera, except way more intense. So Potiphar's wife then wants to sleep with Joseph. She basically begs him over and over again, day after day, I want to sleep with you. I want, all that stuff. And he consistently says, no, I don't want to do it. One, because it's not right to Potiphar. Like, that's not right. That you're Potiphar's wife. You're my master's wife. And two, it's not right to God. It would go against God if I did that. And so consistently, he says no. Eventually, though, Potiphar's wife gets him at a point when he's all alone. There's nobody else in the house. It's just Joseph and Potiphar's wife. And she grabs him by the robe and says, sleep with me. And he basically somehow ducks out of it. He gets out of his robe. She's holding his robe. And I would imagine it's like this moment, this is awkward. And so she's holding his robe and he runs because he don't want to be in that position. He don't want to do that with her. And so he runs. But the wicked thing is that Potiphar's wife then makes a plan, and she makes this plan to lie about Joseph and says that Joseph tried to sleep with her. So she lied about it. And she told everybody. Everybody thought that Joseph tried to sleep with Potiphar's wife, and it was this whole thing. Potiphar ends up finding Joseph and throws him into prison. This is a wild story, guys. This whole story is insane. But Potiphar throws him into prison, and he's there for X amount of time. While he's there, again, the Lord is with Joseph. The Lord is with Joseph this entire time. And so while he's in prison even, everything that he does is successful, to the point where the person who's in charge of the jail, the person who runs the jail, raises him to a position of authority amongst the prisoners. So once again, he's raised to a position of authority. Eventually, Pharaoh's cupbearer and Pharaoh's baker get thrown into prison. And they have some dreams. And they're questioning what these dreams mean. What do they mean? How do we interpret them and all this stuff? And they eventually find Joseph, and Joseph's able to interpret them for them. And essentially, what the dreams say is that the baker is going to die. The baker will not get out of prison. He's going to die. But the cupbearer will eventually, in 3 days, he will be taken out of prison and restored to his place as cupbearer. That's what the dreams told Joseph. That's what Joseph told the cupbearer and the baker. And so that's what happens. Lo and behold, the cupbearer, the baker eventually dies, and the cupbearer is raised back to his position that he once had. Now, Joseph and the cupbearer had a deal. He interpreted the dream, but Joseph was like, hey, listen, I interpreted your dream. When you get out of prison and when you're restored to your place as cupbearer, tell Pharaoh, help me get out of here. Help me. Tell Pharaoh so that I can get out of here. I can interpret dreams. I can interpret his dream. Whatever it is, help me get out of here. But the thing is that the cupbearer forgets. The cupbearer forgot all about it. Just forgot all about it. And I believe 2 years go by, and then Pharaoh starts to have dreams. He starts to have these dreams that he doesn't understand. And he asks everybody, how do I interpret these dreams that I have? How do I make sense of all this? All these dreams and visions that I've been having. And so he asks everybody. Nobody's able to really interpret it. And that's when the cupbearer is like, wait a second. There's this guy, Joseph, who once interpreted my dreams. He can probably interpret yours too. So Pharaoh goes to Joseph. I know this is a long story, by the way. Bear with me. Pharaoh goes to Joseph and asks Joseph to interpret his dreams, and Joseph does. And the dreams that Pharaoh has, basically, the way they're interpreted is this. You're going to have 7 years of prosperity. Okay, you're going to have 7 years where everything goes great. You're going to have food in abundance and all this stuff. And then after that 7 years, you're going to have 7 years of famine. You're going to have 7 years where you have nothing, where you make nothing, where you grow nothing, where you get nothing. That's what the dream is. And keep in mind, back then, they couldn't just go to Walmart and buy food. They relied on the food that they could grow. So you're going to have 7 years of prosperity, followed by 7 years of famine. And Pharaoh's like, what do we do? Joseph provides him then with a solution. For these 7 years, save up some of the excess food that you have, and that way once the bad 7 years, the 7 years of famine hit, you'll have leftover food to sustain you through that time. And so that's what Pharaoh does, and it works out well. It works out well. They save up food for 7 years, and then during the 7 bad years, they're able to have excess food to sustain themselves. Now, Pharaoh liked this proposition, liked this solution so much that he raised Joseph to Pharaoh's right hand. Keep in mind, Pharaoh's like the king. He's like the president of Egypt, right? That's who Pharaoh is. And so he raises Joseph to Pharaoh's right hand man. And now Joseph is in a position of authority over all Egypt. Now, I want to pause for a second and just recap. I want to take a second to just look at how insane this story is. It's like Joseph went from rags to riches, to rags to riches, to rags to riches again. Joseph was loved by his father. He was the favorite of the sons. They threw him into a pit, sold him into slavery. He becomes gets put into a position of authority over all the rest of the slaves at the time. Then he gets put into prison. He gets put in a position of authority over the prisoners, and then he's eventually raised to Pharaoh's right hand. That's an insane story. That's an insane series of events. That's absolutely wild. But that's what happens. And so these 7 years of famine finally come. And the land they're in need. And eventually, Jacob and his other 11 brothers, Joseph's 11 brothers, actually it's 12 because Benjamin, all of his brothers need food. And so their plan is to go to Pharaoh and ask for food so that they can survive. And when they go to ask Pharaoh for food, who else do they encounter than their brother, Joseph, who they once sold into slavery, who they hated. And they didn't recognize Joseph at the beginning of their encounter, but long story short, they eventually found out that it was Joseph. He revealed himself to them, and they found out that Joseph, the person they threw into slavery, is now Pharaoh's right-hand man. And they eventually bow on their knees, as the dreams predicted, and they ask for forgiveness from Joseph. And what's cool about it is that Joseph actually forgives them and then gives them a place to live. Not just any place to live. A place of just one of the nicest properties in all of Egypt. And that's the story of Joseph. And again, this story and Jesus' story, at first glance, it's like these are two so different stories. They're so different. There's so many different things that just don't line up. But then once you start looking at the similarities, all of a sudden you realize that Jesus and Joseph, their stories match up. Joseph and Jesus both were loved especially by their father. Joseph and Jesus both were rejected by man. They were stripped of their robe. They were sold for money. They were falsely accused, endured extreme suffering, were exalted to the right hand of the king, forgave those responsible for their plan, and then prepared a place for those who sought forgiveness. That story is true about both Joseph and Jesus. And that's the beauty of this. That's the beauty of Jesus' story. Jesus, when he came down to earth, he came down as a baby and all that stuff, but he started his ministry. He was rejected by man. Man wanted nothing to do with him. Matter of fact, man crucified him. And then Jesus was put in a grave, and 3 days later he was raised again. And then everybody who seeks forgiveness from Jesus not only gains forgiveness, but Jesus has prepared a place for us to go someday to be with him forever, for eternity. That's the story of Jesus. These stories line up so well. But I want you to note that none of that would have happened with either character if they didn't persist, if they weren't persistent. if they didn't persevere through the trials and the struggles that they faced. Look at Joseph's life. Look at all the trials that he faced. Imagine the pain that he must have felt when his own brothers threw him in a pit for dead and then sold him into slavery. Imagine the pain that he felt when he was in prison. Imagine the pain that he felt when he was a slave. Imagine the pain that he would have felt when Potiphar's wife throws him under the bus and lies about him. He went through so much. And then you look at Jesus. Jesus went through so much as well, on a much larger scale. Jesus was falsely accused. Jesus was whipped. He was beaten. He was mocked. He was spit upon. He had a crown of thorns placed on his head. And then he willingly went to the cross on our behalf. He persevered through all of that on our behalf so that we could spend eternity with him. If either of them persevered, none of that would have happened. If Jesus didn't persevere, we wouldn't have an eternity with him to look forward to. Keep in mind, Jesus could have at any point sent 10,000 angels to come rescue him at a moment's notice. That could have happened at any point. But he persevered and pushed through because he knew that if he did that, it would reconcile humanity back to God, which was his plan all along. Perseverance is key. And so I want you to think about your own life. Think about the points in your life where maybe you're not the most persistent. Maybe you lack perseverance in a few places in life. Maybe it's your job. Maybe with your job you find points where you're just quick to give up. Maybe it's relationships. Maybe with relationships, it's tough to persevere through those things. And so it's like, you know what? I might as well just give up and just forget about it all and just deal with it later, or just forget about it altogether. But if you do that, then you won't ever reap the benefits of what could be if you just persevered. Think about your faith. Think about all the things that you struggle with persevering through in your faith. Whether it's reading your Bible, whether it's praying, whether it's being a part of the church, whether it's whatever it is. Think about all those things and how they all require perseverance. Because you have to realize everything that's worth having is worth persevering for. Everything worth having is worth working for, worth sacrificing for. All these things take sacrifice. But if we persevere, we'll be better in the long run. Jesus persevered for you. How can you persevere for him? I'll see you next time.